welcome, Deval Patrick.
Thank you, Faye.
Thank you.
What happened to all the Andre Agassiz folks who were here?
They popped out to get their autographs.
Is that what it is?
Straight back in, I think. So it's really good to be here. Thank you. And it's your first time at ASU GSV.
It is. I'm dazzled. Dazzled.
It's a big place. Yeah. I wanted to kick off kind of where it all began with you. You grew up on the south side of Chicago. You've talked about kind of the schools that you went to there. You got a scholarship to go to Milton Academy in the 8th grade. And then if I fast forward just a few years, when you became governor of Massachusetts, you pumped $1 billion extra a year into education at that point. And now at Bain Capital, again, education is at the center of what you're doing with Penn Foster. I just wanted you to take us back to the beginning and talk about those initial experiences at school as a child, as a teenager, and how they've helped to kind of inform this thread of education that's run through your career.
You warned me you would ask me this question, and I warned you that I have a lot to say about this, so you have to just cut me off. But yeah, I grew up on the south side of Chicago, and you know, some of that time on welfare, and I went to big, broken, under-resourced, sometimes violent public school. When I was in public life, I was often introduced as if my life began at Milton Academy, because I had this incredible scholarship through a program, incredible opportunity through a program called A Better Chance to go to Milton Academy, which for me was like landing on a different planet. You know, they had a dress code then. Boys wore jackets and ties to classes. My grandparents splurged on a new jacket for me, which was, you know, in our vernacular, a windbreaker. So the first day of class, I get there, I'm all by myself. I arrived the night before, everybody's putting on their blue blazers and their tweed coats, and I had my windbreaker, and I thought, oh my God, I have a lot to figure out. I want to point out I have figured it out. But I think that sometimes the emphasis on Milton Academy and how different that was, how organized it was for frankly, an elite education, sometimes misses the importance of those incredible teachers on the south side of Chicago. My 6th grade teacher, I remember, you know, there were maybe 35 of us in the classroom. She taught us to count and say the greetings in German. She took us to the first opera I'd ever seen. I don't know what they were singing about. I still don't know what they were singing about, but I loved it then and I love it now. She took us to a brand new movie out at the time called The Sound of Music, and she used yeah, and she used it to introduce us to modern European history, the rise of fascism and World War II history. She's the first person who ever, you know, made us, permitted us really to imagine ourselves as citizens of the world. And I think that experience and continuing a relationship with her throughout the rest of my life and many of my other teachers from the south side of Chicago convinced me that there was more to education than tests, than you know, whatever the particular movement in at any one time. And there are a lot of other innovations, but there's something about it, an extraordinary teacher who loves children and loves young people and loves the way they learn and that they learn with those kids. And so when I had an opportunity in office to think about how we continue what had already begun as an education reform journey, one of the things we knew we needed was, well, we invested. But it wasn't just money. You're right. We spent at the highest level in the history of the Commonwealth, even when the bottom was falling out of the rest of the economy, as this is starting in 2007. But we also invested ideas and time, and we brought together public school, you know, sort of traditional district school educators and unions, and the charter community, and the business community, and parent advocates, because it was time to take it to a new level. And I'm pleased, more than pleased. I'm proud of the fact that when I left office, we were #1 in student achievement in the country, and that continued for 5 or 6 of the 8 years I was there, and I think has continued since.
And that notion of measuring student achievement is so key, and that I know at Bain Capital is something you're thinking about a lot in terms of results, because if we turn briefly to the double impact that you're pushing for at Bain Capital, which is about both achieving results financially for your clients, but also impact. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about Penn Foster, about the investments that have been made there, and about how you measure impact.
So we have a new, it's not so new anymore, I guess, 3-year-old fund at Bain Capital with a dedicated team. There's 16 of us on it, who are investing as lower middle market private equity investors. So mainly so-called control investments, majority investments. In the case of education, we are, and in all cases, I should say, trying to drive a PE-style return and measurable impact in 3 thematic verticals: sustainability, health and wellness, and community building. And I can get into that if you like. Within health and wellness, we've been interested in companies, in ed tech companies, whose product or service is about closing achievement gaps or skills gaps, which is how we got interested in Penn Foster, which is just an amazing company whose roots, online education, but whose roots go back to correspondence schools of 100 and some odd years ago. And we have an amazing opportunity, having delivered high school equivalency college courses online at a very affordable price, to use that as a platform to reach middle skills. And I can talk a little bit about how I got interested in that issue, which actually goes back also to my time in office.
Yeah, I was going to say, because I think middle skills is something that...
And then I'll answer your question about how we're measuring.
Perfect. I think the middle school, we've got this kind of almost divergence of education, where you've got those who drop out straight after high school, right, and then those who go on, like yourself, to do their degrees, sometimes multiple degrees. And there's this enormous gap in the middle of those who should be middle skilled, and I think about half of the new employment being created in the US is in that gap. How do we fix that?
I don't know yet. I know it's not going to be the public, private, or philanthropic sectors independently. I think that's probably the answer ultimately is around much more robust collaboration. But I will say that we've always had that gap, as it were, but we sort of depended on the conventional economy to take care of it. That there were opportunities for people who had a high school diploma or less to find their way in to the economy and then to move up. That's changed. At the worst of the economy in Massachusetts, we had, when I was in office, we had about 170,000 people looking for work and 125,000 vacancies. And what employers were telling us was that they couldn't find people with the skills necessary for the jobs they had. And many of the skills, what they required was more than a high school diploma, but less than a college degree. And it turns out, at least then, that the training dollars available to us, most of which came from the federal government, could not be targeted to meet particular needs for particular employers, for particular skill sets, for particular people.
Why is that?
Well, that's a whole other session. But there was just not that flexibility. A lot of prescription on how you use those training dollars. So the notion of what I used to describe as train and pray, offer a course at the local workforce development center and hope that somebody is interested in it and that they will then find employment opportunities or upskilled and better income opportunities on account of it. It just doesn't work anymore. So what we've been interested in through Penn Foster is how do we partner with employers and individual learners to create pathways, and how do we identify specifically what certification, what online and offline skills they need to enable themselves to move forward.
And if I take you back to impact and how you measure that, how, through Penn Foster, are you saying, yes, this has been successful, this is having impact beyond just the returns for investors?
So it's an important question, and I would say in the whole field of impact investing, it's the most debated, the most yeasty part of it. For us, I'd say generally, and I'll speak specifically to Penn Foster, we had a lot of advice from prospective investors and others about trying not to create a unique measure. Although there's no sort of gap accounting for impact, what folks said, if you use something in general usage, at least it gives us a fighting chance to compare your performance on impact with other impact funds. And then the other piece of advice was don't turn your companies into reporting agencies. Really let them be companies. And so use something that where you can narrow down the objectives to which they manage. We are using the GEARS survey from B-Lab, which we think has enabled us to derive particular measures for particular companies and then roll that up and report out to our LPs as a fund. Now, it turns out that now the LPs are in the fund and they want additional information. And so do we, by the way.
The more you feed, the more
Well,
is
no,
wanted.
but it's fair. They're on this journey with us. And so do we. So I think about Penn Foster, for example. It's not a unique challenge, but it's an important one for us to think about. We want the impact we're looking for is not just numbers of students into a particular course and numbers of students successfully completing it. That's important. But it is, what is the impact of that opportunity on their future, on their opportunities? And how do you capture that over time? And it points to, I think, a very important and evolving challenge and opportunity for the field of impact investing, which is that you want your impact to outlast your hold period. So how are you tracking that? And that those capabilities are part of what we're trying to build into Penn Foster today.
It immediately makes me think of the parallels with politics because you've got terms.
Yes.
And how do you ensure that your impact goes beyond the length of your specific political term and beyond the partisanship of that kind of immediate want to be re-elected or to...
It's, I think, I've only had one job in elective office, and there was a bad habit I saw in my business career, this kind of quarter-to-quarter emphasis. Sometimes on the short term, sometimes I think without due regard to the long-term interests of the enterprise. And I think that same bad behavior has become a part of how we govern in this country, to your point. We think election cycle to election cycle, news cycle to news cycle, and not generation to generation. In a way, that's frankly what I was trying to do differently in my opportunity to serve as governor. I think it's also true that we've got to get over the short-term hypnosis of in business as well. Because if you really believe in long-term value, it's not possible anymore, especially at a time of ubiquitous information, to manage to a financial bottom line alone. Because if you ignore the people or the planet, those bottom lines will come around to bite your financial bottom line sooner or later. So for me, it's not such a big leap from there to impact investing, which is about being more, as I see it, more intentional about those non-financial bottom lines and understanding the connection over time.
So in some ways, everything... You'll resist this slightly, but everything serves the financial goal because the financial goal will suffer if you don't think about all those other parts anyway.
I think that's true. I really do. And I think that, there are going to be different people who come to impact investing, for different reasons. Some because they understand that connection, some because they are more impact focused. But one of the reasons that we are underwriting to the exact same financial standards as our large cap fund is because I think when we demonstrate at scale that you don't have to trade return for impact, it raises some really important and unavoidable questions for investing generally.
Talking about impact and addressing an elephant in the room, why did you choose not to run for president?
I see our time is up.
Get it out there. There's more I want to move on to, but I think it's something that people are obviously thinking about, and I think it also gets us into private versus public sector, which I'd love to talk to you about as well.
Well, I think there are lots of ways to serve. We can get into the, details of my own decision, if you want. I mean, the simplest answer, I guess, is, when you sign up, it turns out that you drag everyone and everything you love along with you, whether they have signed up or not. And I have a family I care about, and it's in all of its extensions. And some of them were wildly enthusiastic, and some of them a lot less so. Most people have stuff in their families, and they'd rather sort it out privately, rather than have everybody tweeting about it. So and you know what? It's a fabulous field. A lot of friends, I'm a Democrat, by the way. I'm not the sort of Democrat who thinks you have to hate Republicans to be a good Democrat. But I have a lot of friends in this field, and in a big field like this, with this much talent, it's even hard to know how you break through without being sensational or a celebrity. And I'm none of those, and I don't want to be either of those. But I think it's an exciting time in politics, in part because I think people seem more ready than they have been in a long time for big ideas, big ideas that respond to big and persistent challenges in our national community. And so recognizing, to your second question, that most of those big challenges, Faye, won't be solved by one sector all on its own, and celebrating the fact that, frankly, business more and more is coming off the sidelines to participate in those solutions, which I think is a good thing. And the need for collaboration. Like I say, there are lots of ways to serve, and this is one.
That's interesting, the idea of business coming off the sidelines. I wanted to press you a little bit more on where you think you can have the most impact, private versus public. I know that both those things need to work together. I don't think anybody in this room would disagree. But you're one individual. You have power over your life. And you've obviously moved from private to public and back to private. And therefore, you're so well placed to be able to give us that insight into where can you be the greatest force for good?
Well, I don't think there's any one answer. I think that answer is also very individual. I think one of the most important things is the example you set, and the notion that you can work anywhere and demonstrate that you do not leave your conscience at the door when you go to work has been important to me throughout my professional life. I think the great thing about being governor, for me, not having grown up as a career in politics, or with a career in politics, is that I could do the job without thinking about my career. And it kind of gets back to the point about being willing to risk your politics on an undertaking or a collaboration which is not about the next election, but is instead about the next
when you say risk your politics,
generation.
You mean risk the opportunity for re-election, for example? Yeah.
So I happen to think that's good politics too, but that's not conventional wisdom. Conventional wisdom around politics is that you play for.
You play politics.
You play for shorter term or more immediate accolades and good polling and what's easier. And I get that. I respect people who have made a life in politics. I just happen to think it is also good politics, it turns out, to stand for something. And it doesn't mean you have to be trifling about or disparaging about other people's ideas. I mean, for goodness sake, I don't think I or the Democratic Party has a corner on all the best ideas. But I do think that having a place you're trying to go, an objective, something valuable and meaningless you're trying to leave behind, is something we don't do enough in our politics today. But I think the electorate, not necessarily the electeds, but the electorate, are understanding the importance of that more and more, and you see all kinds of expressions of that.
Why is that happening? Why? I loved what you said about big ideas being kind of bigger now than they have been in the past. Is that by virtue of social media? Is it by virtue of just big seismic events happening within, especially US politics? Or why are people more kind of conscious of those big ideas and the, not the minutiae of one particular policy, but where we should go with healthcare?
Well, I don't know all the answers to that. It is certainly some of the what you said in your, what you alluded to in your question, are some of the features of that, social media, but I think, you know, at the risk of controversy, candidate Trump spoke one truth. I think it was only one, but one truth, when he said that conventional or traditional politics wasn't working well enough for a lot of people. Bernie spoke, Senator Sanders spoke a similar truth. By the way, Barack Obama spoke the same truth more than a decade ago. You don't have to look very far to see that an awful lot of people are stuck, just stuck, in a society that values dynamism, that values economic mobility, which I think is the real issue underlying income inequality. I think that's the thing that's really bothering people. And you see the number of ways that, without even any guile, legislation and public policy is influenced by and in favor of the well-connected. You can kind of understand why people are they want more, and they're demanding more, and I think that's a pretty exciting thing.
Aussie is a company, a media company that focuses on the future, and I wanted to talk to you about the future of investment and the future of double impact. And is there such thing as triple or quadruple impact going forward? Where do you see this sector going? Where will we end up in 5-10 years in terms of people thinking about impact when they're thinking about investment?
Well, I can tell you, as I say, what some of my hopes are. Well, first of all, just to be very narrow, we will probably be raising our second fund soon. I'm excited about that. We've got a team of 16 investment professionals working on this, and we are doing what we can. And I think and we have come to the field humbly, because there are an awful lot of folks in this space before us, and they have taught us just tremendous insights on how to think about being a responsible investor in this space, and where we can be additive. I think that as I said earlier, being able to demonstrate that you don't have to trade return for impact. You may, that's not a value judgment, but that you don't have to is an important touch point for investing generally, frankly, a reference point for investing generally. And I think that the consuming public, broadly defined, is insisting on a more comprehensive view about what long-term value is, and will make more and more of their choices, and are making more and more of their choices around these kinds of issues. Because I think the challenges that face us as humankind are too big for any one sector, too big for government alone, too big for the business sector alone, too big for philanthropy. I think that demonstrating a willingness to collaborate and point in the same direction as a society and trying to solve our problems is another thing I'm looking for at scale. And we see lots of scaled down examples of this, but the examples are very, very encouraging.
So you're optimistic?
I am. I mean, I'm practical too. You know, I know that there are still skeptics, but you know, I used to say to people, I'm a black man. I'm so used to skepticism. I'm so over that. You just keep going. We will. I'm gonna paraphrase Lincoln, who said, you know, if he's wrong, 1,000 angels proclaiming he's right isn't going to make a difference. But if he's right, you know, it'll. Most folks will say he was right all along. So let our experience be a learning for us and for others, and our example be encouragement to the future.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Deval. Really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you for your time.
Good to be with you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.